Hello and welcome, and in today's video I'm going to be showing with you the top 10 art creatures with a special ability. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. In at number 10 we have got the Megalosaurus, and this creature is really here because it's so varied in all of its abilities that I think it deserves to be on the list. Also, it's a very interesting creature as well, and especially useful on operation, considering it counts as always being nighttime, but in the daytime obviously it'll want to rest. But obviously when it becomes night, this thing is a ferocious carnivore capable of demolishing all kinds of creatures, and obviously that really does make it largely excel. Like, it can just demolish a carno in absolute seconds. It really is a wonder what this thing could do. Still doesn't make me immune to microraptors, but although I got knocked off of the mount, this thing still managed to handily take out that microraptor and rip it to absolute shreds, as it can grab small creatures in its mouth and just absolutely tear them apart. It's a really nice ability to have, and it helps with creatures like microraptors. Also, they deal the bleed ability when they do that as well, which is just generally a nice thing to have. They're pretty good alpha killers as well. Sadly, this alpha decided to run off a cliff though, so I didn't actually have the chance to kill it for the sake of the b-roll. Either way, very nice, very easy to use, very mobile carnivores that really have a lot of value going for them, and if you haven't already, tame yourself a Megalosaurus. Continuing on our list, we have got the Velonosaur, and this creature is here simply because it's so diverse in its abilities that I think it definitely does deserve a place on the list. This creature is unique in its approach to a special ability, essentially shooting out spines, and as far as I'm concerned, no other creature really does it like the Velonosaur. And although if the damage did actually scale with these spines, if you leveled up the melee, they would be used so much, they really aren't used at all. But if that was a thing that came out in a TLC, that would be such a useful thing for this creature to have, and that's the only one downside I really have with it. Although its firing ability and all of that is really cool, really inventive, and its stamina drain is one of the lowest in the game as well, so that is just generally a really nice thing for you to keep with a creature like this. It is going to be extremely effective, and you're going to love this creature to bits. So the Rino Gatha, I'm sure you all know this creature, and you'll definitely know it just for its wealth of special abilities. Its tame method in itself sort of is something quite special as well, although it is pretty much just a reskin of the Reba tame method. That's besides the point. That's not what we're looking at here. We're looking at its ability to pick up really large creatures, namely. That's actually the most useful ability I've found out of this. And I know cryopods exist, but sometimes it is just useful to carry them out like that. Also, these creatures deal a heavy amount of damage as well with their kind of, you call them like sort of call them honey balls and those kind of things. It kind of shoots lasers in an extent of thought, but it's more kind of honey. I'm not quite sure really what it is. It's some insect liquid, but either way, it shoots that, deals heavy amounts of damage, and just generally it really is a very capable creature. It also can fly really long distances as well, and it's got tons of weight on it, so it really is so useful for all of those aspects. And it is a creature which you should definitely hold quite highly to yourself, and I definitely would with a creature like this, because it is an extremely useful one, and considering it spawns on the island as well as Lost Island, of course, it is an extremely accessible creature to everyone out there. And its tame method really isn't the worst if you get it right, and also a net gun really does help when trapping it. Instead of you having to build a whole trap, you can simply just net gun it, and as long as you have like a magnifying glass or the awesome spyglass mod, which you can just get anyway if you're on ASA, unless you're on a server and you don't own it, then you're really going to have a good time, because it's going to be so much easier to discern the health of this creature, which is a useful thing to know while saving this thing, is you do need to get its health as low as possible. In at number 7 we have got the Shadow Mane, and this creature is here because, come on, it really does pack a lot when it just comes to general function. It has the hydration buff, it has tons of mobility up its arsenal. Also, it can deal even more damage as it charges its damage up over time. On top of that, it can go invisible as well, and generally it just is a very nice creature to have. It does the pack buff as well, and you can just do so much with it, from boss fights to just general travel to PvP to PvE. It's so versatile in all of its abilities that it just becomes a creature for all, unless you can't really do the taming method, which can be a slog at the worst of times. and really it's not the particularly most fun thing out there, but once you get around that, you're not going to have too bad of a time. They're also really great underwater swimmers as well. Actually makes them a pretty great boss creature for defeating the Moda, which you might not expect on first hand, but they are actually really good for the job. Now we have got ourselves the Blood Stalker, and this creature really does deserve to be on the list for me. Come on, look at this thing. It is a spider which has a wealth of abilities up its sleeve. Again, maybe not quite as popular as the Shadowmane, but for me actually more useful, as there's a better boss fighting creature which is actually in at the #1 position on this list, but I'll save that for when I'm talking about that creature. Essentially, this is my go-to underwater traveling mount. It is just the go-to be-all, end-all mount for underwater exploration for me. It is so fast. You also can see all the aggros of all the creatures, which I could do anyway because with awesome spyglass, but if I'm playing some more vanilla stuff, which I tend to do with my friends, I don't really end up playing a lot of modern stuff. When I'm with other people, I tend to just do that more solo, but when I'm with other people, you get a Bloodstalker out, and it's really useful to know all the aggros of the creatures, especially underwater, because the visibility isn't the best, as I'm sure you'll know. It's a little bit better in ASA, but still, you know, these things aren't really in ASA at the moment anyway. You won't really be using them. I certainly haven't used them in ASA. I only use these things in ASE, but I'm mainly playing ASE at the moment for just general reasons. You probably know why, to be honest. Either way, these creatures, incredibly great underwater mounts. They've also just got loads of mobility on top of that, and they're just great surface traveling mounts as well. They can actually deal pretty hefty amounts of damage. You might not expect that, but trust me, you really can get some damage done with these creatures, and I do urge you to give them a go, as they really are worth it, and they're not the hardest things out there to tame compared to something like the Shadowmane. They're a lot harder, but there's also a better creature for bosses which you can use instead of the Shadowmane, and you can use this thing for all the underwater stuff, and for me it works perfectly. In at number 5 we have got the Reaper. This creature is here simply because, come on, it's the Reaper, and although maybe it's not packed with the biggest and best special abilities out there, it really does deserve to be on the list, and you could kind of give the Rock Drake a little bit of an honourable mention here as well, as I think they're both quite deserving of the number 5 slots. The Rock Drake is a great glider, also can deal hefty amounts of damage and can go invisible as well. It really was quite an innovator for all of that, whereas a creature like this is capable of just dealing so much heavy damage. They can go under the ground as well, and on top of that they can slow creatures with their tail attack. They really are very useful. On top of that as well, their taming method, it really was the one to innovate on to the Rino Gatha's taming method. It's pretty much the same, except it impregnates you and not a dinosaur. It works better with the xenomorph theme. It's pretty much just like the film Alien. If you've watched that, you kind of know the general gist of how you're going to be taming one of these things, and it's really just, it's so cool the progression you can get out of a creature like this. Like, once you've got one, you feel on top of the world, and getting one on Operation, not on Gen 2, because on Gen 2 it's an absolute cheese. It really does feel like you've made tons of progress, and a lot of progression has been made, and there's a lot of build up to it, and even once you've got one, you've still got to get it out of that very dangerous zone. There's a lot of steps into taming one of these things, and it's definitely well worth it, but a very great special ability creature. Next up, we have got ourselves the Snow Owl. This creature is here because it is the best healer in the game by far, and it also does stem on to give resources to other creatures for their special abilities to work, which is actually insane when you think about it. It adds on to other creatures. It's just so well thought out, and Extinction actually generally is a very well thought out DLC map. It's actually one of my favorites out there. I know it's not a popular one across everyone, but I still really do like this map. I know Operation's a fan favorite from all of the community for all the DLC maps. Really, Ragnarok is up there as well. For me, Extinction is definitely up there, though. You could probably tell because I also put the Velonosaur earlier on in the list. As you can tell, the Snow has the gliding ability, not like a glider, but it has the kind of dive bombing ability, you could call it instead, similar to the Griffin, but in my opinion this is a better creature out there than the Griffin. They also do have a kind of thermal camera as well, which is useful just generally for spawning creatures. You can use that in any given PvE or PvP scenario. You can apply it to whatever context you need to. Also on top of that as well, they can heal up creatures like I mentioned earlier. If you level up that stamina, you'll be able to heal up creatures for longer as well. You can heal up your own creatures, enemy creatures, or wild creatures. Really works out just in boss fights on Extinction when you're using these things, and also just generally if you need to heal up a wild creature, if you know maybe you've knocked its health down too low while you've been taming it, it is another really useful thing. On top of that as well, they can give out owl pellets, which are useful to get insane loot out of gachas, which is another really cool thing I find with this creature. And before we get into the top 3, I just want to talk about a few honourable mentions that didn't really make the list. Firstly, I want to talk about the Tropio and the Astrodelphis. Their saddles really do make them some cool creatures as well. Same actually going for the Andrew Stalker set, Garnet turret on top of it. It really adds a lot of innovation to the creature, which you probably wouldn't expect, and also the tame methods are quirky and inventive in their own way. On top of that, you've got to kind of talk about the Giga, the Carcharodontosaurus. Those creatures are definitely up there. The Gigantoraptor, the new one that has just came out, that has some really nice abilities on it, and obviously the Stego as well, just for its great PvP use. In number 3, we have got the Mwing. This glider is my favourite in the game, the best in the business in my opinion. Really, this creature really does pack a punch when it comes to travelling, and considering you can unlock it at I think level 18, it's definitely pre-level 20. It is absurd how much use you can get out of this creature. They can also carry and steal baby enemy creatures as well. If you want to do that, you can obviously carry your own baby creatures. No matter the size, they'll just shrink into the saddle. The same goes for the Gigantoraptor as well, and they're also ridiculously easy to tame. Just put a few signs down to trap them and trank them out. Feed them some Megia berries, because that's probably all you already have as a feeding food, at least when you're taming them early on. Actually, even go for a higher level one, because they really aren't that difficult to knock out, especially if you got some tranks. It's not going to be too difficult. Some higher level ones will still go down reasonably quickly, maybe bring like 20 or 30, and a 150 should be very easily attainable with that many tranks. They also act as a portable feeding trough as well for you breeders out there. It's going to add a lot for you, and obviously the carrying of the babies is just a nice ability as well. If paired with a Gigantoraptor as well, you can just get some insane breeding use out of these things. They can also gather berries as well and skim across the top of the water, and they're just so versatile, and they're actually pretty good swimmers as well. In number 2, we have got the Desmodus. This creature really does need to be here. Like, come on, it's got Sanguine Elixir, an absolute cheese for tames. It deserves to be in the number 2 spot for me. It also does have that same gliding ability like the Snow Owl, obviously not like the Mwing, because it is actually a flyer, whereas the Mwing is only a glider. These creatures have the exact same tame method as the Bloodstalker, which I didn't actually mention earlier, but essentially you get blood bags and then you feed it to the creature. They'll just be in your inventory. They'll take them out of your inventory once they've grabbed you and the taming process starts. On top of that as well, there are also blood bag farms, so you can farm blood bags out of creatures with this thing, which you couldn't do with a Bloodstalker. Personally, I think the Bloodstalker should be able to do that too, considering what it is, and it sucks the life out of creatures. I think it should be able to do that same ability, but I guess maybe it gives this creature an edge on top of the Bloodstalker for you to use this instead. I guess it gives some variety between the two of them. Also, they can go invisible at nighttime, and you can pick players off riders really easily with these creatures. It's actually insane how much you can get out of it, so really great special ability creatures. And finally, in at number 1, we have got the Deinonychus. I have to put this creature here as it can deal bleed damage to bosses, which, as far as I'm concerned, no other arc creature out there can actually do. It just has such an edge over it and over any other creature. Not over it, so I don't know why I said that. Has an edge over so many other creatures. Because of this, I have to put it in at the top 10 spot, so the number 1 spot. Weird way of wording that, don't know why I did that. Either way, you can see the bleed ability in action here. It is ripping that Bronto to shreds. It's also grabbing onto it as well, so it really can't come off. Obviously it will once it runs out of stamina, but for most things you won't be running out of stamina anytime soon. Their stamina drain is pretty low. On top of this, they do have the pack buff as well, and although they lack any kind of hydration buff and really any skill in the underwater mobility factor, they are extremely mobile on land, and they really can get a lot done in that regard. They also take no full damage as well, which just allows for extra ease of movement, and little creatures do have this as well. I really do enjoy this feature. Obviously fall damage isn't much of a problem because you can simply dismount your creatures just before you hit the ground, but there's so much more fluidity once you have a creature which doesn't take full damage. They can also just scale any kind of wall or vertical surface very easily just by hopping around them. Not quite how the Rock Drake or Thyla would do it by walking up them, but still you do have that ability, and obviously it's going to aid you tremendously in travel. It really does make them even nicer to use on top of all of their insane abilities. They've got tons of damage, and the bleed ability to bosses really does sell it for me.
Now, of course, we must shout out our patrons, Ekaterina Puchkova and Karina Thorne, who are our paid Patreon members at the moment. Thank you for all your support. I really appreciate everyone on this list. Everyone else is, of course, free members. Thanks for the support, though.